take a look at 436 Athlone. The recording has started. I sent out a newsletter the other day that I think confused things. I was coming back from vacation and I was rushing to get the newsletter out the door because it had some timely items. So I just wanted to provide, and bear with me, I'm going to take 5 minutes, which I normally don't take as long as this at the beginning of these, to provide sort of my perspective on where we are. So we're taking a look at 436 Athlone. I wanted to put this in the context of the Westboro infill study, which is the new rules for infill in Westboro's R3R zone. So the heart of Westboro, north of say Dover Court. We have new rules for infill. In the R3R zone in Westboro, it has always allowed singles, semis, and triplexes. And over the course of the last 15 years or so, maybe a little bit longer, the Committee of Adjustment has been regularly giving variances on lot width and area to allow for the replacement of some of those singles, or a lot of those singles, with semi-detached. And the Westboro infill study was previewing our new official plan, which contemplates having to fit 400,000 new residents in Ottawa over the course of the next 25 years or so. And we've said that 50% of those new residents are going to live in existing urban areas, which is the intensification that we talk about so much in Kitchissippi Ward. The R3 zones are probably, we're ahead of the curve in terms of what's going to happen to those inner urban third density areas like Westboro that have always allowed the singles, the semis, and the tris, in that we have normalized the existing development pattern where the lot width and the area that the developers have always been able to go and get a rubber stamp at the Committee of Adjustment from are now normalized as of right. And then around the edge of Westboro, there is some new density that's been proposed, or that has now been allowed in these R4 areas around Byron and in a few corner lots. And then Churchill is going to be allowed to go up a little bit further as well. The other thing we did in Westboro was we, in the low-rise area, the two-story area, we treated the heights differently so that you can have a little more height if you have a peaked roof. The flat-roofed homes have been limited in how high those can go compared to previously. We would anticipate that this new R3 rule for Westboro will become what happens to the R3 zones right across the more mature neighborhoods in Ottawa as the new official plan, unless the province does something crazy and allows 4 stories as of right everywhere like they have floated. But otherwise, we kind of know now what the limits of intensification will be in Westboro when the new official plan is implemented through the comprehensive zoning bylaw review in the next term of council. The parcel that we're looking at tonight is an R4UC. It's one of those parcels that was upzoned. It allows, and I'm going to not get myself in trouble tonight, it basically allows you to have a low-rise apartment building that fits within a certain envelope up to 3 stories tall, and up to 12 stories. It doesn't have to have parking. So I know that is probably going to be, I'm hearing it on the street. That is a discussion, but that's what the zoning allows. And in these discussions, there are 2 main processes that I want to make sure everyone understands occur when you have a development proposal like this that doesn't meet the zoning as of right, where they want to do something that is different from the zoning. The first of those processes is they can ask for a rezoning of the property. And those happen when somebody is trying to do something that is significantly different from what the zoning allows. You want to put row houses where row houses aren't allowed. You want to put commercial in a residential neighborhood. You want to add stories onto a tower, those sorts of things. But if you're basically doing something that is allowed by the zoning, like building a low-rise apartment building at 3 stories, but you are looking for something that has a slightly larger building envelope, then you go to the Committee of Adjustment and you seek variances. And in the application package that I think a lot of you have taken a look at online, you will see that the applicant here has asked for 3 variances from the zoning. And I'm going to let them obviously explain those because, again, I don't want to get myself in trouble again by getting too far ahead of myself. And then once the zoning is taken care of, once something has received variances, then ordinarily it proceeds to what we're talking about tonight, which is the site plan. The site plan is a technical review of a proposal. Are the driveways wide enough? Where is the HVAC equipment going to go? What is the landscaping plan? Those technical details. The site plan does not approve changes from zoning. The site plan assumes that the zoning is in place. And tonight what we're doing is we're looking at a site plan for a building that doesn't have permissions to change from the existing zoning. So it's two different discussions. And if the variances are going to be allowed, they will have to go to the committee of adjustment, and the residents will have their opportunity, just like usual at the C of A, to press their case with the committee. So, sorry, I'm just taking a look and make sure I have it. I have a significant question with respect to how if more units are added than 12, how it won't trigger a requirement for a variance from the parking requirement. But I know Rosalind and Peter will take us through that. If this was a discussion about a 12-unit low-rise apartment building that fit within the allowed zoning envelope, then we would be having strictly a site plan discussion. But I know our site plan discussion tonight is also going to include elements of the changes from zoning, be they variances or rezoning, or however the applicant proceeds, that would need to happen before the site plan was actually allowed to be built and get a building permit. My request of the developer early on in the process was to stick to the zoning. We have added some significant new density into Westboro around the edges in anticipation of the new official plan. And my request is that we stick to the zoning. For the most part, in the R3R portion, we're not seeing the variances anymore. Developers are respecting that. But in this case, the developer feels they have a good case for getting some changes from the zoning, and that's a case that they're going to have to make to the committee of adjustment, which will provide you, the residents, with an opportunity to press your case. I apologize, that was long-winded. I don't normally do that here, but I did want to make sure that people understand where we are in the process and that I'm not used to dealing with a site plan discussion before all the zoning considerations are tidied away. Steph, I'll let you take it back over. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. I'll just go over the housekeeping real quickly, just to bring everyone up to speed. I've seen 1 or 2 emails come in just asking why you can't participate right now. So just to go over that. So what we're running right now is a Zoom webinar. So you're probably just able to see the panelists right now, but not the other attendees. So in this case, what we're going to do is, like most of our other public meetings, we'll start off with a presentation from the applicants, a short 15-20-minute presentation where they're going to go over their plans, and I'm sure many of you are acquainted with it, but just to go over the finer technical details of this site plan application. After their presentation is wrapped up, we'll go straight into a Q&A. In this case, what you can do to submit your questions is you should be able to see a little Q&A button on the bottom of your screen right now. If you open that up, you should be able to type in a question and it'll come to us and the panelists to read. And then what we'll do is we'll go through those questions, sort of like through a speaking list, and we'll read them out to the applicants and make sure they get answered. And that's more or less how the Q&A will go, depending on how long or how short it goes and whether we need to open up at all. We also have the planner on this file in attendance, Jean-Jacques Renaud, who you've likely submitted your comments to if you haven't already. He is the guy that you're going to want to submit them to, and he'll be able to answer any questions with regard to city policy and sort of the finer sort of zoning details if those kind of come up in the discussion. So with that, I'll just say this recording is also being recorded and posted on the Kitchissippi Board YouTube later this week, probably within the next 2 days. So if you have any neighbors that weren't able to attend, you'll be able to look it up on the Kitchissippi Board YouTube. If you email our office, we'll be able to give you the link right away, but probably the easiest way is just checking YouTube directly. We're happy to help no matter what the case is. So with that, I'll wrap up very quickly and pass on the baton to Rosalind to start the presentation. So there you go.
Okay. So I will show a series of drawings to explain our design proposal. And Peter, please jump in at any point. Prompt me with questions if you think I've moved past something too quickly or missed something, or just jump in and provide information as you see fit. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen here. So the development proposal is for this lot. This is Athlone and this is Byron. So it's one property in from the corner. Both of these corner lots are in a condition where they front onto Athlone and they back onto the side of the new semi that's located at 228, 226 Byron. And sorry, I always struggle just a little bit to get to my controls when the Zoom panel is on up there. Okay. So this is the site plan. It's quite technical looking, but the site plan process is quite technical, dealing with all of the minutiae of how a site functions. So in gray behind the drawing, you'll see the survey, the topographical survey with all the existing conditions. And in black over top, you see the proposed development. So the existing 2 trees at the front will be retained. The primary entrance will be on the left side, and there's a secondary entrance on the right. It leads, both of those paths lead around the building to the back. And here, this path on the right also leads particularly to this front porch for this front-facing unit. In the back, there's bike sheds and a garbage shed. And on this side, the path ramps up to a side door. So we're proposing to build this small building with 16 dwelling units. And there are 2 accessible units, wheelchair accessible units on the ground floor that are accessed by this side pathway. So I'm sorry about my little struggle here. There we go. Okay. Okay, so these are the building elevations that you may have seen. They're on file with our site plan application and with our committee of adjustment application. The front of the building is shown here with the primary entrance on the left and a dedicated front porch over here and balcony. And we'll come back to this drawing. It's rather technical and it's hard to get a sense of what things would really look like. But I'm going to take you to the 3D model. So this one, it's just easier to appreciate what's going on. So in the white and gray tones, you see the existing buildings. And in color, you see our proposed development. So the primary entrance is here on the left. There's a ramp to the side door on the left. On the right, there's another pathway, primarily leading to the front entrance of that front unit. You'll see we've taken some care to provide a mix of contemporary and traditional features that are in keeping with the existing architecture along the street. So we've included a peaked feature. The entire building does not have a sloped roof. We are being held to high standards by the city for stormwater management. And we're using the flat roof that covers most of the building as part of our strategy for managing flood events or stormwater events, like really big rainstorms, storing water temporarily up there and then releasing it slowly into the storm system. You'll see on this side, there are also some contemporary features, and you can see in the context of the street where we got the idea of the mix of contemporary and traditional features that make up this facade. We also have been careful to design the 3rd floor level so that we have roof lines that mediate the scale with our neighbors on either side. So I'll go back to those PDFs again. Okay. So these drawings are flattened views of each side of the building so that you can see in detail what's going on. But of course, nobody ever sees a building like this in real life. So in some ways they're accurate, in other ways it's kind of a distorted way of looking at our proposed future reality. But you get a sense of the ramp going up to the side door. So it's not way up out of the ground, it's just rising up enough to get people into the ground floor. On this back corner, there's some cabinets that are covering some meters and electrical equipment. On the back of the building, we're proposing some porches. This is the back elevation showing where those porches are. On the right elevation, you see the peak that we were seeing in the front view. And again, at the back, you see the porches. So I hope that's enough to kind of orient people with respect to physically what it's going to look like. We are proposing 16 units. And as Jeff said, there's a requirement for parking for units over and above 12. That aspect of the zoning bylaw was created when the R4 was written, with the sense that on this size of lot, you couldn't fit more than 12 units. But real estate pressures are such that there's an awful lot of demand for small units. And we're interested in putting 16 and have the perspective that if 12 units worth of people are willing to live here without a car, another 4 units worth would also be willing to live here without a car.
So Rosalind,
yeah.
Maybe you can just explain the unit mix.
Oh, sure. That's a great idea. So we have a mix of unit types from 2-bedroom units to bachelor units. We've made an effort to design those bachelor units to be the kind of bachelor you stick around in. So they're not designed for students or for people coming and going. They're designed with enough storage space and a kind of a nook or designated area for for sleeping space. And they're designed to be kind of trendy, but small. And so there's that whole variety. The 2-bedroom unit, I guess the nicest 2-bedroom unit, in my opinion, is the ground floor one that has a great big deck out the front. But the 2-bedroom unit above that also has a nice balcony at the front. So yeah, there's a real mix there.
Right, and the zoning requires, the R4 UC zone requires us to have 25% of those units be 2-bedroom units, and the mix of the balance is on our site is 1 and bachelors, correct?
That's right.
Right, and we can vary those 1-bedroom and bachelors. You know, there's no restriction within the zoning that would tell us that we can't adjust those bachelors and 1-bedrooms.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that the zoning was, when it was written, there were people petitioning for those 2-bedroom units. And they add value to this development because they add diversity in the building. When you're renting a building, it can be really great to have diversity in the, to have a kind of healthy mix of people in the building. It just works well when you don't have all one demographic together, I think.
And I think it's worth noting on the issue of parking that in the R4 UC zone, lots under 450 square meters, parking is actually prohibited. So you can have 16 units, but if your lot is less than 450 square meters, parking you're not allowed to have any parking. In this case, unfortunately for us, this lot is 461.5 square meters, and as a result, we're allowed to have parking, I guess, if you would.
Fine.
And in this case, we're required to provide would be two residential parking spaces, and I guess 0.4 of a visitor parking space. So and our position is, well, you know, do those two spaces, are they materially you know, important to the functioning of the development? So so a little bit more context as you're moving through the presentation.
Peter and
Thanks.
Rosalind, may I ask, just pause you there for a second, by what mechanism would you be relieved of that requirement? Does that become another variance that you seek at the Committee of Adjustment?
Which one?
The parking. So you're required to provide a certain amount according to the bylaw. You're not proposing to provide any.
Right.
And so is it a variance that you're seeking at the C of A?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. That's, I've been wondering that for days. Thank you.
Yeah.
And if you look at our variance application, you'll see it's broken into two, one for the visitor parking and one for the resident parking.
Yeah.
It amounts to, you know, 1.4, did you say, Peter? Spaces in
So
total.
it's 0.5. It's 0.5 for the residents above 12, and 0.1 for visitors. So it would be, I think it's 2.4
Yeah.
is the parking requirement, which is 2 parking spaces.
And
Go ahead.
the bylaw and many aspects of the bylaw right now is intended to really limit the amount of parking and driveways along the street. Our new official plan limits curb cuts. And there's a real sort of concerted effort in all of our planning documents right now to reduce the visible impact of cars in front of buildings. So we could alternatively be going to the committee to ask for 2 cars parked in front of this building, but it seems appropriate to us instead to be asking for relief from those 2 parking spaces. On a lot of this size, to provide on-site parking takes up so much space that there isn't a significant building left to build. So that's not really an option for us. So then really it's a question of we would prefer to build 16 units instead of 12. If we built 12, then we wouldn't need the parking variance. So then the question that will come before the Committee of Adjustments is, if 12 units are appropriate here, are 16 units appropriate here? Because that is really the crux of the parking question. And throughout the lifetime of many of these buildings surrounding us, the occupant load in those other buildings has actually been significantly higher than it is today. So there's all different ways of looking at the pros and cons and value of increased population. But certainly the small shops in this neighborhood will absolutely benefit a lot from having more small households who are walking about, getting around on foot. So our variances then are the parking, also rear yard setback. So not too long ago, the zoned setback requirement for this location was 25% of the lot depth in the back. That was the case when our neighbor at 422 built their house. They have built it at 25%. The requirement now for us is 30%. The reason, or one of the primary reasons that the bylaw changed was out of concern for the green center of the block and ensuring that in this green space at the core of each block, we'd allow enough space for green and recreation and trees. So the green center of the block is protected more when we give a greater setback for properties that are back facing into this green center. Our property, like our neighbors, is not in that condition. Only just a little tag corner of it is part of that green center of the block. And so we would like to line up with our neighbor. The official plan is calling for intensification, and we're in a housing crisis. And it makes a lot of sense to us to build matching our rear neighbor and to have slightly bigger units. The difference in the building footprint is about 5 feet, and the quality of life for those inside those units is significantly better. So it makes sense to us, and we're going to ask the committee what they think.
So,
Um,
Rosalind, before
yeah.
you leave the rear yard, the other standard that is usually applied to rear yards, it's not only 30% of the lot depth, but it's a minimum 25% of the lot area. And we're meeting that 25% of the lot area. So we're not seeking a variance for the area that we're required to have, only the depth of the building. And I think we need to just clarify one other little point about the R4UC zone that we're in right now. The R4UC zone allows, it doesn't pin the unit count to 12 units. That's just a measure that's used within the parking standard bylaw. And in fact, what the R4UC zone does is it says you can have a low-rise apartment building of 9 or more units if you meet the lot width and lot area standard, which is a minimum lot width of 15 meters and a minimum lot area of 450 square meters, which we meet. So the question for the question is not, is 12 units good? We're permitted by right to have any configuration of units above 9 because our lot is that big, of course, respecting the 2-bedroom 25% requirement. So, we could reconfigure the insides to have 16 units, 2 bedrooms and bachelors. And so we don't want to give people the impression that if it's not 16, it's 12. Sorry, back to you, Rosalind.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Peter. I'll just show a couple of images here. This is a rear view toward our proposed development across the backyards. This is what it would look like without the rear yard variance. And this is what it would look like with the rear yard variance. And I've had people ask me to point out the difference in those two images. So the Committee of Adjustment will have to decide whether they believe that that's significant. For the interior of the units, it certainly is significant. It adds pretty valuable living space. And on the outside, we'll have to decide at the committee whether it is significant. Then the last variance has to do, I'll go to the site plan first, has to do with the location. The last few variances have to do with the location of our bike storage. So bike sheds in general are required to be set 2 feet from the property line. As a general rule, that's a good idea because sheds shed water off of them onto the ground beside them. And it's important for us to manage all the storm water that lands on our property and not to be shedding it onto our neighbor. However, when we're providing high quality bike storage for all of our residents, it takes up quite a bit of space. And it's a pity to waste those 2 feet between the bike shed and the fence. And what's more, that 2 feet of space between sheds and fence lines, I don't know about in your yard, but in my yard, we are constantly beating back the weeds in there. It's a bit of a disaster. So we decided that we would like to ask the committee for permission to move our bike sheds to the fence and design bike sheds that will drain water back onto our property. And from the perspective of the immediate neighbor, it just kind of looks like it's all fence. So it doesn't change the impact at all on neighbors, except that you don't have a weed patch right next to you. And for our residents, it gives them more amenity space and keeps everybody's life simple. So these are our 2 bike sheds that you see here. They're sitting right tight to the fence. And these are, this is a little diagram of them. So on the yard side, so facing the amenity space, there's doors to get in. And this is a section diagram cutting through the little shed. So there you see the fence at the back of it. It slopes up so that our residents don't bang their head getting their bikes in. The water drains down and then is directed forward back onto our property. So if you're used to reading roof slope diagrams, this is an explanation of how it is that we're draining the water back onto our property. So that would be another variance. The bylaw requires a green buffer at the back of properties of 3 meters. And again, that goes to the green center of the block philosophy. And again, the back of our property is not at the green center of the block. So we're actually able to provide more green by being more efficient this way with our space. It gives us room to put a large canopy tree in our backyard, which is significant. It's significant for the overall tree canopy in the neighborhood, and it's getting to the edge there of the green center of the block, and so sort of peripherally contributes, or part of our tree canopy will still contribute to that green center. So we feel like that's a win on all sides, and we're hoping others will too. We have consulted with immediate neighbors a couple of times and have been working to incorporate some of the feedback. So for example, we've been looking carefully at some more recent comments to do with privacy issues and these back balconies. There was a concern that our neighbor to this side has a terrace up here that we would be looking down into it. So we used our 3D modeling to figure out whether we should be proposing a privacy wall or something to prevent that overlook, and discovered that in fact from these position points we can't see their terrace at all. We know that there's concern about the proximity of all of these back-facing windows to the side wall of our neighbor here. But there's not a lot that we can do about that one. The lot fabric is such that our rear yard abuts a side yard, and we certainly need to have rear windows. And whether or not those rear windows are 5 feet to the right or left doesn't change that there's going to be windows there. So we are going to plant a tree. If there's suggestions about what kind of tree, or the amount of tree leaf cover, or seasonal suggestions, perhaps, you know, there's suggestion about whether the tree loses its leaves in the winter. We'd be very, very open to those kinds of suggestions, but there's a limit to how much we can deal with privacy issues on that side. On the south side, we've done our best to limit the windows. So we've pushed windows forward and back. These windows are not causing any, don't present any privacy issues. These ones we've made quite small. We received comments from the southern neighbor that we should dress up this wall a bit more with more line work. And so we will be doing that. There was also the proposal that we have some more windows here, but clerestory windows, not windows you see out. And our client has declined to put the clerestory windows, but we will be adding in more banding and articulation for sure. We also have shifted this part of the building back a little bit from the setback, so that on this wall down here, we're actually exceeding the side yard setback requirement. Let's see what else. Oh, and we will be using a wood look board siding of a light color as per your requests. Peter, anything else I should add at this point?
No, I think you've covered it.
Okay. Jeff, do you want to ask any questions first? I'll just hand it back to you guys.
Yeah, no, I think I'll just ask Steph to start going through the Q&A. Oh, what happened to my camera? There we go.
For sure. Actually, Jean-Charles, if you want to maybe just speak for a few minutes on maybe some of the details on the zoning and the variances. I know we discussed that, so I just wanted to open the floor to you, and then I'll lay out all the Q&A details after that.
Sure thing. Thanks, Steph. So Jean-Charles is my name. I'm the file lead on the site plan. You can call me JC if that's easier for you. I do not mind one way or the other. So I just wanted to give you or say a few words about the process and where we are in the site planning process. So as it was mentioned prior, we're looking at a site plan control application, and that's the type of application that staff have authority to approve. This authority is delegated to us by council. The file was circulated to you on June 22nd of this year. And notices were sent out to the local community associations and Councillor Leeper, and a sign was installed on the property. And I'm sure most of you have seen it. Circulation period has ended on July 20th, 2022. However, a summary of comments has yet to be sent to the applicant. That should happen in the next few days, hopefully. One question I get oftentimes about the delay or the timelines that we set for the circulation, the initial circulation. The question is, can I submit comments after that end of circulation period? And the answer is yes. You can always send me comments and I'll take a look at it up until the time where a decision is made on the applicant or the application. But obviously, the sooner you send those in, the easier it is for me to look at them, interpret them, send them back to the applicant, and for them to be actually, properly, folded into the mix. So the sooner the better. So once I've sent my comments to the applicant, the next step will be for the applicant to review the comments, provide the proposal, and provide the next submission. And also, it's been mentioned before, the application for minor variance has been made, which will be coming up shortly. One question I've received from various members of the public is the timing of the Committee of Adjustment application in relations to the site plan application. And it is rather common for a site plan application to move along before an application goes to the Committee of Adjustment for consideration. And in fact, the Committee of Adjustment prefers it. Staff also prefer it. And if ever Committee of Adjustment application was made in advance of site plan application, it would most likely just be put on hold until such time as the site plan application has made its way through the circulation period, just to make sure that things are ironed out and there are no surprises or no need for the application to make its way to the Committee of Adjustment a second time. So this is very common to have an application for site plan been made in advance of Committee of Adjustment. However, you will certainly not move forward to approval of site plan control before a minor variance is obtained. So I just wanted to clear that up. So at this point, the objective will be to work with the applicant to get to a point where staff are comfortable with the proposal. And at that point, we'll be able to move forward towards a recommendation. So that's it for me. I'm happy to answer any question that anybody may have in regards to process. But at this point, as it is today, staff are not in a position to speak to our position on the project itself, but mostly on the process. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, JC. And with that, we'll dive right into the Q&A. So just I'll quickly reiterate the process. I see a number of comments already in the Q&A, but for anyone who might have showed up just while the presentation was going on, if you have any questions to ask, we just ask that you put them into the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. If you have any trouble with that, you should be able to message us, the hosts and the panelists, about any technical problems, and I'll be happy to help, find a way to get your question out there no matter what. And with that said, I'll jump to the first question that we have. So David and Peggy ask to provide in front of the building, or to provide parking in front of the building would require a variance, would it not? I think just as a small question to the developers, maybe to answer.
Yes, that's correct. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say front yard parking is not allowed in the zoning bylaw. So you can't have parking in front of the front wall of the building. So we would have to notch out the building at and which is quite common. You see it. We would have to notch it out on one of the sides. I doubt we could notch out both sides, but I'm not sure how. I'd have to think more about how you would provide that. But again, you know, lots of this size, although this is a little bit bigger, you know, the zoning was not ever intended to have them provide parking. Like on lots that are 450 square meters, you're prohibited actually from having parking. So, so we're taking that and saying, well, if 450 is good enough to have no parking, 461, that extra 11 square meters shouldn't tip you over into the parking area, especially when the big direction from City Council is active transportation. And one of the reasons why we're so dedicated, or Roslyn is so dedicated to providing, you know, bike parking and bike storage. And I'm sure some of the comments that come back from transportation will be, and from planning will be, how are we going to, or what are we going to do in addition to bike parking to promote active transportation? And that's something that we'll have to address and can be codified in the site plan agreement that we will sign with the city.
I just wanted to quickly jump in if I can. I'm seeing some Q&A questions around the mechanics of the webinar format and why people can't see the questions that are being posed. If you're not a panelist, you won't be able to see those questions. This is the same format we've been using pretty much ever since we moved to Zoom for the development applications. We used to have that open for the first couple of meetings, but unfortunately, some very inappropriate stuff comes through the Q&A, and we've seen threats of violence come through the Q&A. I know tempers run high around the development applications, so in order to ensure that this is a reasonably comfortable space for everybody who is participating, we do moderate the Q&A. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. And hopefully that, I know there's a few questions like that, so hopefully that answered those. You'll see those questions go away as answered as well to anyone who might be a bit unfamiliar with the format. We answer them live, we mark it as live, and then it goes that way. But if you feel it wasn't answered, feel free to put it back in. I usually try and be pretty strong in getting the legit questions out. If there's obviously, if anything's a bit threatening or as Jeff described, inappropriate, those don't get answered, but very rarely the case, and anything asking, questions of the application is going to get answered. We've had some very long meetings to make sure that is the case. So I'll jump forward to the next question from David, who asks, please explain how these 16 units are distributed over 3 floors of the building. Do some units have no balconies?
Okay, so we have a living level in the basement as well. The basement units are all very bright. We've made quite an effort to make sure that we've got windows into basement units. So we've got some deep window wells in the back to make sure that we get light in. We've got some long horizontal windows around along the side, on the north side. And the front of the building, again, we've got a little sunken area in our landscaping to make sure that we get lots of light in. And so we have 4 living levels: basement, ground, second, and third. And on each living level, we have 4 dwelling units. One of the key ways in which we're able to accomplish this is by having a very space efficient a mechanical system for the building. Our air conditioners are located on the roof. They're going to be located towards the center, a little bit north of center. And that was based on request from our southern neighbor, who's got some higher rooms and prefers them to be a little north of center. And we have some electrical equipment mounted on the outside of the building here in this covered cabinet area, and one piece of equipment here. So by being very space efficient with our mechanical and electrical, we're able to reserve almost all of the interior space for dwelling units with 4 per floor. Balconies, almost all the dwelling units have balconies. There are, let's see, our basement units do not. And our ground floor unit close to the front door does not, because it would kind of compete with the activities of the front entrance and not be very private. And our ground floor units at the back do not, but they have steps right out into the backyard amenity space. Oh, that's right. There's one other 2-bedroom unit up here that does not, but it has really cool kind of slopey features in the living space, and it's going to be really nice. It will not have a balcony though. It was a compromise we had to make in order to have these architectural features that relate so directly to the architecture and style of the existing street.
Thanks, Rosalind. And maybe if you don't mind me following up with a similar question from David, who asked further to the inside units, how many windows are in these units? And I don't know if you have this on hand, but he asked to see a floor plan for stories 2 and 3. I can flag the question if that helps as well.
I don't have those drawings handy. David, I know, lives to the south of the development, so this would be the wall that he would be looking toward. So I can just describe for you that there's a unit here, a second floor unit here, with a door onto a balcony, windows at the front, and a side bedroom window. The windows at the front are really generous, so great big windows. And it's a bay window, so there's windows across the front and then turning the sides as well. So the living, dining, kitchen space will have these fantastic windows and the door to the patio. And then the bedroom has quite a big window. Bathrooms generally don't have windows. I don't think there's any bathrooms in here that have a window. And some of the smaller units that are bachelor units have a clerestory window above an area that you could use for your bed. And there are different ways to furnish a bachelor. So we don't want to assume that everybody's going to put their bed here. There might be a desk here, but it means that it can be a bright space, but also very furnishable below, even though it's a small space. All of the units have more windows for the space that's in them than the average unit built in the 40s, 50s, 60s, or 70s. So our expectation for lightness in our units is much higher than it was in the development of much of the older homes in the neighborhood, for sure. Windowsills also tend to be are quite low. So on the front units, the windowsills are only 20 inches off the floor. Here they're going down almost to the floor. Yeah, so they'll be very bright. And sorry, I don't have plans.
Thanks, Rosalind. And I'm sure, David, if you want to be put in contact maybe for further details, that's something we can help with. But hopefully that helps answer your question for now. And of course, follow up if that isn't the case. And David and Peggy ask, could you please clarify how the 3-meter buffer for which we are requesting the variance actually affects the sheds in the rear yard. Maybe a plan would be useful, but I leave that question with you.
Okay, so the 3-meter buffer, it's very hard to draw on this, but it would affect this kind of general area back here, right? And the idea is that that area is to be left green. And I guess in principle, it's a great idea. The authors of the zoning bylaw, I think, were onto something with the idea that the center of the block should be green. But when we think about our location and how we can contribute to the green center of the block and create a fantastic amenity space for our residents, the solution that we have come up with doesn't meet the letter of the law. We actually yield more tree rooting space by pushing our sheds to the back property line here, and this one remains in 2 feet, just for practical reasons and drainage. These ones were able to push to the fence, and then that frees us up with much more space to have a tree planted somewhere around here and a large tree canopy here over time. Does that answer the question?
I hope so, but if not, I'm sure we'll see in the Q&A if it's not, if there's a bit more explanation that's needed. And I'll just jump to the next question, also from Peggy and David, who asked for Jeff to confirm that you stated in your introduction that no variances were warranted in this instance.
Yeah, I don't think I used the word warranted. And this is being recorded. It'll go up on the Kitchissippi Ward YouTube page soon. But I think what I said was that I asked the developer to adhere to the existing zoning because it is brand new zoning. And I'm not keen to start seeing that be varied.
Awesome, thanks, Jeff. And I also see Peggy is asking the David question, so I'll be mindful going forward. I apologize for that. And we have a few questions here, speaking to some questions on the parking. So I'll start with Ron's, who asks, how will potential tenants be screened to ensure that they don't own a car, that they have no expectation of on-street parking for tenants, and nor their overnight visitors, friends, and family?
Peter, do you want to take this one?
Well, I mean, we're not proposing to provide parking. So if you're going to rent in here, you're going to know that there is no parking. You know, I think it's fairly, it's the direction that the city wants us to go in. They want us to promote active transportation. They want us to promote bicycle and using the bicycle network as an alternative to a private car and parking. And you know, as for screening, I'm not sure how we would screen them, but if you rent here, you're not going to have a parking space. So because there is no parking.
Peter, if I may, one of my frustrations, and poor Steph gets the brunt of it as well, with the no parking buildings, is that while I support no parking buildings, far too often developers take advantage of the ability to not provide parking, or I know Rosalind is committed in this case to that vision for development. But there's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So when a prospective tenant says, "Can I get parking?" The real estate agent or whoever is proposing to lease the unit to them says, "Well, there's no parking on site. We can't rent you a parking spot, but there's street parking." And one of the challenges that we have in the ward is that there really isn't. Right? If you want to count on street parking, the you're going to find yourself challenged to do that. We've got winter daytime parking bans, winter nighttime parking bans, neighbors call bylaw once time limits expire. It's really, really challenging. And we get the calls in the office. Right. I know of multiple tenants who have moved into no parking buildings who were led to believe by an agent or somebody that they'd be able to find street parking. And when they can't, and I tell them I have no help to give you, they have no choice but to move. And that's obviously a very stressful experience. And it's frustrating for me to say, I'm sorry, I can't help you. The site plan agreement that you sign will contain a provision that says you'll make it very explicit in the lease that there is no parking spot. But my frustration is among some agents that wink, wink, nudge, nudge, so that people arrive in a no parking building with cars and then have to move out 6 months later because they just can't do it.
So, I mean, if you're asking us, would we put a sign in our, I'm sure you're going to condition us with a requirement to put them in all of the leases here. Are you asking us to put a sign in the vestibule that says, please be aware that there is no parking. We are not providing parking. Nor are we aware that parking is available on neighborhood streets. If you rent here, don't expect parking. I mean, if that's what it comes to, I mean, we'd say yes, but
it's a commitment. Like I haven't been able to fix it because we don't have the leverage and power, right? The decision to lease is not within our purview. The discussion that happens between an agent and a prospective tenant is not within the city's purview. I want to make it really clear. So I have another building down the street from me where a few people tried to move into a building that has no parking. And, when I say, no, I can't help you, there is no parking in this neighborhood. Like, it's really tough to find. They're telling me, well, the landlord told me I could. And I'm like, I had that explicit discussion with this developer to tell their tenants, that there is no parking. It's a problem I haven't been able to figure out what mechanism to be able to leverage to fix. But I would be seeking that commitment from you and from any agents who might be renting a building in here to be really honest with prospective tenants. If you're going to move in here, don't expect to be able to live here with a car. The street parking just isn't available.
And I think that, on this file, as Rosalind will tell you, and on many others, developers are hearing your call. And when I mean you, I mean broader, the city council's call for less parking and more active transportation. And they're looking at, where you're building your transit and providing and seeking to provide very little parking and encouraging either through the provision of Presto cards and welcome packages that include, holding their hand on active transportation modes to move people to other modes of transportation other than their car, and which is, that's a signal city council has sent, and developers, especially the small ones, are like totally heeding that call. So, I would tell you, our guy, the person that we work for is, like he's happy to tell people, look, you rent my building, there's no parking. And so
I will just say, I mean, this has been a discussion that people have bent my ear on quite a bit on the street and in email. Like half of people who live in Ottawa Centre in multi-residential units don't have a car. Right. We've got apartment towers around us where the parking utilization is nowhere near 100%. Right. There is very definitely a market over the thousands of multi-residential units in Ottawa Centre today. There are thousands of people who live without cars, and it's quite normal that people don't have a car. My singular and for those who do need a car, we are allowing parking in hundreds and hundreds of new units in addition to the stock that already has parking. There is lots of choice in Kitchissippi. If you have to have a car, there are lots of places that you can rent a unit in. But there are going to be a small number of buildings that don't have parking. It's just I've asked GOBA about this, and I've talked to every developer, and I just want to like really put the kibosh on anyone sort of representing to tenants that they'll be able to find parking on the street. Don't worry about it, because it's just stress for everybody.
No, I mean, and that's certainly not what we would say to people. And the other thing about parking that it takes up space, but it's also expensive, right? And if you're talking about underground parking, underground parking in the missing middle makes the missing middle unaffordable.
Yep.
So, people who are trying to promote the missing middle, which this type of development is, are looking to provide it without parking.
Yep.
And so because the cost is just too high, and the benefit for us to provide the parking at 2 spaces, we're providing the parking that's required by the zoning bylaw. That's 2 spaces. It's the cost benefit to us is just not reasonable.
Yep. No, I want to see the variances, or I want to see the zoning adhered to, but I absolutely understand that, one of the reasons that we've created the building envelopes that we have is because the parking space just makes stormwater management that much more difficult. You don't have room for the trees. You don't have the room for the softscaping. Like I get it. It's just that, we have provided a building envelope that we think can be worked with and provide all that. And obviously you've got a different case to make to the C of A.
Jeff, let me just put in just a little pitch for the GOBA team who've worked so hard providing the city with recommendations about parking for neighborhoods as they transition away from an auto-dependent culture and towards a culture of walking and transit use. Those comments, I don't think have really been heard or taken to heart by anyone. And that's a pity, because we're trying to work constructively and solve problems, and we're not being heard.
I hear you. And for those listening or watching, I know Rosalind has been a staunch champion for neighborhood parking lots so that you can build these no parking buildings. And there are some common areas where people can park. I'm not going to delve into that tonight, because we'll be hours here, and this is a site plan discussion. But I've heard you, Rosalind. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah. The GOBA group provided multiple possible solutions to transitional parking, not just neighborhood parking lots. So they provided the city with a whole menu of ideas and are waiting to get recognitions.
Okay.
We also recognize that there's a problem.
Okay. Thanks, Rosalind.
Thanks, Jeff, Rosalind, and Peter. And maybe I'll just touch on very quickly. I know Kelly, Spence, and Andrew and Parm, you both had questions relating to the parking and the impacts on the on-street parking. I think that sort of touched on, if not gave a pretty formidable answer on everyone's sort of stance on it, but feel free to follow up with another question if you don't feel the parking questions were sort of answered on, where are residents of units expected to park and the impacts on the on-street parking and so on and so forth. I know Andrew and Parm, you also noted telling people that there's no parking simply pushes the issue onto the local residents. Was the plan to manage compliance with parking bylaws? There are plenty of options to manage compliance with parking bylaws, and the applicant could provide the city with resources, i.e. funding for bylaw officials as part of their conditions for approval. So I just take that as a comment to be considered, of course, but just to let you know, those questions were grabbed. And that's why they'll be marked as such, but feel free to follow up as well. And I'll jump to another question from Karen, who asks, Rosalind, can you speak to the tree conservation report, please?
Yeah, so our intention is to follow the recommendations of our arborist and retain the front trees. So there's 2 trees in the front. They both need to be trimmed. They're just a bit fluffy right now, and we need space to work and get around them to the site behind. So they'll both be trimmed by an arborist. Just to bring them in a bit so we have space to work, and they'll both be protected and retained.
Okay, thank you, Rosalind, and Karen, feel free to follow up. I can also post the tree conservation report if anyone needs that on hand as well. And the next question is from Peggy, and this is perhaps more to staff. And it's a bigger question, but when do we anticipate the new official plan to actually be passed by council / the province?
I can speak, but I unfortunately don't have an answer, as nobody has an answer. It could take years. Hopefully it doesn't. It could take, less or more than that. It's in the minister's hand, and it will remain in the minister's hand until they send it back to us. So anyways, I'm sorry, but there's nobody has an answer to that question, unfortunately.
JC, just to clarify, the question was council / the province, and council has passed it. That's
Yes,
important.
yes, of course.
Yeah.
Awesome. And going to the next question from Andrew and Parm, who asks, how does the developer justify such a drastic increase in occupancy, 33%, on a brand new bylaw? Given the amount of redevelopment in the area, an additional 4 units is immaterial. And I'll leave that with Rosalind and Peter, if you'd like.
So the most important thing to recognize is that we're not proposing more residents than is permitted. The number of units here is permitted. It's the proportion of parking to units that we're varying. Peter, do you want to add anything? No. Okay.
No, you're correct. There's no unit cap on the units that can be provided here. There is some structure. You've 25% of the units that you provide must be 2-bedroom units. The only cap is when you have to provide parking. So the first 12 units are, if you want to say, free, and then after that you're required to provide parking. And in this case, that would require us, this development, to provide, I think we're calculating 2 parking spaces. Now, we might get into a discussion whether that 0.4 becomes 1 or goes back down, but we would say we would be required to provide 2 parking spaces. Now, if our lot hit 450 square meters, we still would meet the requirements for, we would not have a unit cap, but we would have a prohibition on providing parking. So on lots 450 square meters and smaller, you are not allowed to have any parking on site, and you have no restriction on the number of units that you provide within the other requirements of the zoning bylaw. And as I indicated, that's the 2-bedroom requirement.
So just to be clear, the building itself, the size of the building is compliant, the number of dwelling units is compliant, the front yard setbacks, side yard setbacks compliant. In fact, the side yards are a little bit larger than required. The amount of soft landscaping, amenity space, this is all compliant. The population in the building is compliant. The tree canopy that we're proposing meets tree canopy targets. Yeah, so it's just the parking that we're proposing to vary, the rear yard setback, and a little thing to do with the sheds.
Thank you, Rosalind. And and Peter, and maybe that ties in well to, would you say this also is how you're justifying the change in the ratio of parking to units? I only ask because Andrew and Parm also followed up with a question saying, how do you justify the changing of the ratio of parking to units, and might dovetail such conclude well here.
Yeah, so I think we've already answered it, so I'll just kind of summarize and bring the pieces together. There's as Peter points out, the issue that the intent of the bylaw is for lots up to this size of lot, almost including this size of lot, to never have parking. It's just, they're just not intended to have parking for a multi-unit building. There's the idea that throughout the zoning bylaw and all of our planning documents, the intent is to diminish the impact of cars on the street, to not see as many cars on the street, to not have our sidewalks or road edges interrupted by driveways in any way. And so we're meeting all of that intent. It's also the intent of R4 that small buildings can be appropriate without parking. Clearly, the bylaw anticipates 12 units without parking, and those households living comfortably without a car. So we seem to be in a very, very small little gap in the zoning between the part of the zoning that says, wow, no cars at all, that would be crazy, and the part of the zoning that begins to regulate proportionately based on the size of the unit. So our perspective is that this is a very walkable location. We intend to attract the first dozen households worth of units easily with the incentive to walk and use transit. And we wouldn't hesitate to think that another 4 households would just as easily be welcomed into that building without demand for parking. So there are a lot of people who are seeking units without parking.
Thank you, Rosalind, for the answer and touching on a few of the questions in that one. I'll jump to the next question from David, who asks, does the developer recognize that their proposed units are marketable only to young people in their 20s or active seniors who can walk or ride a bike? Tenants who bear children will soon find the need for a car and therefore the need to move out. Obviously it can be taken as a comment, but if you'd like to address that, as I know there's a few other questions sort of echoing some similar concerns.
I would say no, we do not recognize that. We recognize that there's a much greater diversity in our population, and that everyone deserves a home.
Thanks, Rosalind. And of course, if there's any sort of more niche questions, that come out of those bigger discussions, to everyone here, feel free to put those in the chat. And we have a few questions on the unit mixes. So we've got 2 on those, and I'll kind of put those together. I've gotten some questions from people asking, we've seen their question. I can see all of them right now. We've got 12 officially in the chat right now. So we're getting through them, but I can confirm if you're worried, you haven't had your question seen, it's there. So Scott asks, does the apartment include any 3-bedroom units for larger families or those who need space for work from home offices, and or would there be consideration for that?
No, we're not providing for that demographic.
And if you don't mind, I'll just jump to seem to have lost the other question. So we'll go to the next one. I apologize if we're sort of jumping around here. So Karen asks, in my experience, the outdoor waste storage sheds have not worked well for these multi-unit dwellings. They break, they are left open. There's noise generated by the rumbling of dumpsters up and down the pavement on collection days. Can you show on your site plan the location of the trash sheds and the path garbage collectors would take to collect it?
Sure. I'll just switch colors here so I can point. So this is the garbage shed back here. So tenants would come out, they can come out this stair exit here to deposit their garbage and recycling. And on garbage day, the recycling and garbage would be moved along the side yard here on a straight path. And then we've allowed for a garbage pad here beside the curb. So it will be a solid pad, an asphalt pad, so that it doesn't become just sort of a muddy puddle there from having bins sitting on it once a week. And that is the plan. There's plenty of space for the bins to move along, and you'll see there's little double lines along there representing the curbs on either side. The curbs on either side of the path will prevent the bins from banging against the wooden fence, protecting the fence and the wall of the building.
If I may, I think Karen is speaking from a bit of experience at the corner of Roosevelt and Byron, where the theory hasn't necessarily matched up with the demand. Karen, I'd suggest that you should be emailing JC with your comments about that for his consideration as he goes through the site plan approval process. And obviously, if you want to copy me as well, that would be awesome. But I know it doesn't always work out the way it's supposed to work out.
Definitely though, Karen, I can say that this is city collection. So the experience that you might be having with private collection, where they're coming 2 or 3 times a week to pick up different types of collection. This is just the regular city collection that happens on the same day as everybody else. So those bins aren't getting carted to the street at a different time than anybody else. They're going out with everybody's and they're coming back with everybody's. So that hopefully will help a bit compared to the situation you experience.
Thank you, Rosalind. I'll go to the next few questions we have. So Kelly and Spence ask, every apartment building on Athlone Avenue has at least 1 parking space per unit. The streetscape has parking on the lots for the existing buildings. How does this development fit into the existing streetscape?
I love that question. JC, the development industry has been suggesting for quite a long time that a little bit of parking on the in front of a building is quite appropriate. The city hasn't agreed with us.
If we're talking about front yard parking, Rosalind's right. Front yard parking is absolutely not permitted and not sought after and not promoted by the city. As you know, if the comment was regarding parking in general, personally, I don't think that parking establishes the context of a neighborhood. It's more the build form. But that's, I guess, a question of perspective.
Thank you, JC and Rosalind. I know it can be a bit of sort of a technical discussion on the streetscape, obviously. So if that comes up again, happy to keep bringing those forward. Otherwise, though, I'll jump to the next question. And maybe this will just be a quick one for Rosalind and JC from Lisa Now. That just came up, but when is the committee of adjustment date for this development, or anticipated date might be the better question.
I think it is the 4th Wednesday in September.
Okay. Even if it's just kind of giving an idea, as long as it's, I'm sure not the meeting happening in 2 days. It'll be useful for anyone who's wondering about those questions. Just to try and get a good mix of questions happening here. Maybe to touch on the roof mechanical So Heather Mitchell asks, will the roof mechanical be enclosed? What is sort of the anticipated noise? Obviously, this tends to be a concern we hear from neighbors. So if you'd like to speak to that, that would be excellent.
I believe that JC's engineers are reviewing our proposed location and the noise that it will generate, and will, based on the information we've provided, will dictate whether there's a noise fence around it or not. So it's pretty closely regulated by the city, and we will comply as required.
Sounds good. I see another question from Peggy as well, sort of on that note. So on that sort of question of HVAC and noise, it's still being evaluated by the city. So is there any information maybe that could be provided? Just seeing another question come up.
Yeah, I think the most important thing to know is that if you've ever experienced the rumble of your neighbor's air conditioner, air conditioners that are new are built to high noise standards. They're much more quiet than a 20-year-old air conditioner. So I know I've been scarred by the experience of having my neighbor's old thundering AC outside my kitchen window. And that is not what we're proposing. These are new, relatively quiet units, and they will be sound protected to meet city standards. Does that help?
I think so. I will defer to anyone who might have additional comments and thoughts on it. I know that Peggy's follow-up comment to it was just considering that up to 16 HVAC units could end up on the roof. How does the promoter feel about how the built form fits into the neighborhood? I think you sort of addressed that.
Oh, yes, but keep in mind there's a parapet. So I'm not sure if anyone will ever be able to see them up there, and we've agreed that with Peggy and David that we're going to move them north of center on that roof. And so even from one of their upper rooms, I'm not sure that they'll be able to perceive that they're up there in any way.
Okay, thank you, Rosalind. Hopefully that helps answer that question. But of course, we'll see what additional sort of comments and questions come in. And I see just from Kelly and Spence too, just to wrap in a comment on that point too, who note that they are just behind the church, which installed a new HVAC system a few years ago. It is not quiet and is now difficult to enjoy our own backyard. So just
that's frustrating. Okay, however, these 16 units are serving small residential units, dwelling units. So they're small ACs for small dwelling units. Keep in mind our largest unit is a 2-bedroom unit. Very different from the kind of HVAC system that feeds an entire church building. But I feel your pain. That's really unfortunate.
Thanks, Rosalind, for elaborating. And I apologize, we're just sort of pulling questions a bit out of order just to get a bit of a mix at this point, and grouping them, when we can. And maybe I'll just put a question to staff quickly, since Peggy asked how much of the city process will be made public. Maybe JC, if you can speak to the
Sure.
next steps and that sort of thing.
So it is a public process, even though residents don't receive notification in their mail like they would on a committee of adjustment application or on a rezoning. It's still open to comments, and we are having this meeting tonight, and I am accepting comments. So, and also, if you don't know already, all the submission materials are available on the city's DevApps website for you to consume and take a look at it and comment on afterwards. And also the subsequent submissions, the second submission, hopefully not too many more after that, will also be uploaded to DevApps for your enjoyment, perhaps. But it is a public process. And to follow up on my own comment, the Committee of Adjustment application process is also public. You will see a sign on the property if it's not there already, and a notice would be sent out to everyone within 60 meters of the residence. And you will be invited to the hearing. Sorry, I keep interrupting myself.
It's all good. I apologize for not muting my typing in that case too. And I'll just jump to another question from Heather Mitchell, who comments, I like the 2-bedroom units and appreciate the attempt to make these units livable, even though they are small. The bike shed is interesting, but we are worried about the water and snow runoff. I would rather that they have weeds than water, storm water. Can you talk more about how these sheds will work in the winter?
Absolutely. And let me say, we're trying not to make the units livable. We're trying to make them delightful. Livable seems like a low bar. We're going for delightful. So if I go back to the image of the shed, it's an architectural drawing, so it's not the most accessible, but the idea is that from the neighbor's side, it just looks like a fence, and you'd see the roof rising a little bit set at a distance from the fence, so not right at the French fence edge does that roof rise up. On the side here, you'll see that there's a point here at which the water is pooling and coming to the sides of the shed and dripping off the shed at either end at this point here, well on our property, where it can be channeled back into the overland flow that we're managing on our site in order to meet stormwater management requirements. So the roof slopes back from the fence and down from the entry doors to a point here, and then it slopes out from that point to the 2 ends of the shed and off onto the ground. So yes, snow will pile here, and as you would expect. As the snow melts, it will drain at those 2 end points, and in the winter, snow will blow around.
Thank you, Rosalind. I'm just going to the next question. This is sort of a broad one to Jeff and perhaps the applicants and staff. But Lisa No asks, can you point to the research that shows a need for this kind of intensification in the ward? There are several larger developments closer to transit in this ward, and I'd be interested to learn how the city knows that there is a demand that warrants this aggressive overdevelopment in our neighborhood.
It's a big question, and I will try to keep my answer brief because, of course, I can talk about this for hours. Over-intensification is obviously a very subjective term. I live in Hintonburg, where most of this kind of development is allowed as of right, and I love my neighborhood and I love my neighbors, and it's an awesome place to live. The answer is that the city, through the course of a very well consulted, very public official plan process, has done what it calls its growth management strategy. So at the beginning of this presentation, I spoke to the fact that, we think 400,000 people, that our population is going to increase by around 400,000 people over the course of the next 25 years. There are new provincial figures that are coming out that anticipate even more. And we don't have enough housing to accommodate, those 400,000 new people. We've said that half of those people will live in new subdivisions, but residents have clearly told us that they want council to mitigate against urban sprawl, building homes further and further afield from the core means more driving, more climate impacts, more natural areas that are disturbed. So the compromise the council reached is to target in our official plan that 50% of people will live in already serviced areas. And the official plan says that we want most of those people to live close to the kinds of amenities that our ward offers. So it is better to have somebody living without a car in the corner of Byron and Athlone, where they're kitty corner to a grocery store, and it's an easy scoot or bike or bus down on the 16 to the Cardinwood Library, than it is to put people in Barrhaven, where they're not going to have a choice except to drive. So our area, Kitchissippi, because of the kinds of transportation and other amenities that exist here, which make it truly a 15-minute community, is one of the areas that's targeted for intensification. Now, it's different across the ward. Hintonburg, Mechanicsville are R4 neighborhoods, which are going to allow this kind of development everywhere. In Westboro, what we said is that the intensification is going to happen at, it's an R3, a third residential density level, where most of the neighborhood is going to continue to come out at that single, semi, and semi-detached, with some smaller or some lower, what they call missing middle buildings around the edge. So, yep, right near transit, we've said those are going to be 26, and I think 32 is the new 26. 26 used to be the new 12. The towers around there are going to go really high. Around the edge of the community, you're going to see 6-story buildings. Closer to the residential, you're going to see 3-story multi-use dwellings. And those will get filled. They will absolutely get filled. I was taking a look at the article in the CBC this morning. Obviously, with this open house in mind, renters facing record high prices, dwindling options in Ottawa, right? We do not have enough rental stock in this city to serve the many, many thousands of people who are going to need to rent apartments. And as interest rates rise, as housing costs rise, affordability of home ownership rises, which is something the city has very little control over, even more people are going to be competing for rental housing. So when City Council says you can build a low-rise apartment building at 3 stories on the edge of a community, that is to address that growing crisis in rental housing. Each one of those towers has got maybe a couple hundred units in it, right? 300 units in the biggest, tallest, densest ones. We need tens of thousands of rental housing. The low-rise apartment building that is 3 stories and looks like a house is a very sensitive way to try to incorporate that in the edge of communities. And then in the comprehensive zoning bylaw review that's going to be done in the next term of council, that's going to get spread out even further afield. The problem with putting it even further afield is that you're putting people into communities that don't offer the 15-minute community advantages that Kitchissippi does. I don't want to go on for hours about this. There is absolutely a demand as we try to fit a couple of 100,000 residents into Ottawa in a way that is environmentally and economically sustainable for taxpayers. There is absolutely demand for more rental housing in what we call the missing middle in our ward and every ward that is like ours. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Jeff. And I think we're getting to a couple of the questions that are perhaps some of the bigger questions, speaking to some broader trends. So I'll jump to those for now. And if we see another technical question coming, I'll go to those. But Kelly and Spence actually just very quickly commented on sort of this discussion we're having. saying, are we now in a neighborhood where a house that sold for 900,000 plus is now a knockdown? Affordable houses are now being marketed as development without any consideration that they could house young families. I think this sort of ties into this broader discussion on infill and intensification. I don't know, Jeff, if you want to.
Yeah, and it's a longer discussion than what we're supposed to be doing tonight, which is a site plan discussion for a lot that is zoned for a low-rise apartment building. So the zoning is there for a low-rise apartment building. The exact building envelope of that is going to be something that the Committee of Adjustment will decide, but you know, it is basically allowed. The single detached homes in our ward are, you know, selling for $900,000. It is only the most affluent who can afford to purchase those homes. You know, adding more rental stock is critical, I think, to maintaining a diversity of residents in our ward who can just ensure that we have a healthy mix at various different income levels of various different ages, so that it's not just the most affluent who can move into our ward able to afford a $900,000 house. Yeah, the zoning again in Westboro has always allowed for single, semis, and triplexes. It developed as a single detached neighborhood. One of the things we've seen is that the population of Westboro declined. It's only in the past few years that the actual population of Westboro has gotten back to where it used to be in like the 1960s. And when you take a look at who was living in those singles in the 1960s, and it's an unfortunate term, Rosalind, I don't mean to take you to task for it, but I think you spoke about something called the occupant load, which is a fairly heartless way of saying how many people live in there, right? In the 1960s, we had a much higher population in a lot of Westboro because you had multi-generation households and people had more children and they had borders. Whereas, you know, over the past many years now, that's not where North Americans live anymore. North Americans want to have their own nuclear family unit in a very large home without borders and often without a multi-generation household. One of the things with adding rental housing into the neighborhood is that we can start to achieve populations that are more mixed, and a population that can support our local businesses and a population that keeps our schools healthy. Tonight we're talking about where does the HVAC go on this building, which was a very good question. But Kelly, I'd be more than happy to sit down and spend an hour or two running through the city's growth management strategy, intensification, and the official plan with you at a time of your choosing.
Yeah, and at the end of this presentation, we'll of course put our emails in here, and if anyone wants to set up any smaller meetings with the offshoots of maybe these broader conversations, I'm here to help. I know Jeff is open to those. We have our wonderful office hours as always that we will always be advertising. But seeing that we're down to the last few questions, we'll try and get through those as best we can. So I see from Scott Burden, who asks, will the building be designed and constructed to a sufficiently high environmental standard so as to allow the use of heat pumps for HVAC? I'm sure the applicants can speak to us and perhaps city staff if necessary, but I put it to you.
We will have air exchange units for every dwelling unit in the building so that there's air being circulated through and that heat is being captured. The air that's being released out, the heat is captured from it and brought back into the intake air. And that's a standard for all Ontario construction now.
And JC, maybe I'll just raise this to you, but the high performance development standards, would they come into play for something like this, just for anyone who is maybe wondering? I think I saw Jeff speaking to.
Well, those standards do not apply to this application at this time. However, this has been circulated internally, including to staff in the, sorry, I have it right here, staff in the, the environmental sustainability group. So any comments that they have or any suggestions that they have to make this proposal more energy efficient, or perhaps bird friendly, or more ecological, things like that, those types of comments will be evaluated and provided to the applicant.
Awesome. Thank you for the clarity on that, JC. And I'll just grab Scott's follow-up comment as well. As he notes, just a comment, but I thought that the infrastructure work currently ongoing on Byron and Highcroft and later Athlone would eliminate the street parking in front of low rises currently situated near Clare Park. I don't know if we can speak to that, but definitely a comment to keep in mind. So I haven't heard anything of that.
There is definitely parking lots in front of some of those buildings, and but I'm not sure exactly which ones, but they are on Athlone. Scott, if you email me, we've got the exact plans for that. But that was there. You are right. I'm just trying to think of whether all of them have eliminated street parking or not as we build the sidewalks in, and the traffic calming and all that good stuff, and try to preserve the trees, et cetera, et cetera. But Scott, you're basically right.
Awesome. I'll pop those emails in the chat real quick, Sue. And I'll go to the next question from Karen from a little bit ago, who asks, Jeff or JC, has the city yet arrived at a way to ensure protected trees do not disappear when the service is going? When they're found midstream to be in the way of a building whose permit has already been approved, we continue to have these occurrences where some surprise during the build necessitates tree removal.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no, Karen. Because this is going since January, forestry has had planners who work on the infill files. They take a look at every one of the committee of adjustment applications, and if they can suggest ways to build the building differently such that the tree is preserved, they do so. And they have been more active going to the committee of adjustment and saying they object to developments or they object to variances for buildings where they consider that there are ways to preserve the tree, and the developer has nonetheless persisted with the design that they want. So that is there is an extra set of eyes from foresters on these applications, and they have been successful actually at saving quite a few trees, but given the constraints of how the statutes work, not everyone. But I was just taking a look, Rosalind, you're going to be servicing in from Athlone. The servicing is on the other side of the street, like the water main is on the other side of the street and everything. I don't see a reason why you would need to remove any trees due to servicing on this one.
That's right. We're going to bring in our services under the front entrance. So that's where our pathways, our main pathway is. And so we don't anticipate a problem. I would encourage people, though, throughout the construction period to speak up if you see something going wrong, because the site super can only do so much. And there are something like 200 trades who come in and work on a project during the course of the whole construction period. And it can be a real challenge to manage all those 200 groups of people. So during construction, the contractor's name will be available to the immediate neighbors and contact information. And look out for the trees. We can work together a little bit on that one.
Sorry, I should just add, you'll be, when you have your site plan approval that indicates where all the various different entrances go, you're going to receive a building permit for that configuration, and you're going to be required to build whatever we approve in the site plan. So if the site servicing is proposed to come in from a particular place, and the front door is proposed to go in a particular place, and the path is proposed to go in a particular place, you know, the basic requirement is that that's what you build, because that's what the building permit's going to be based on.
And perhaps I can add that, like Jeff said earlier, it's going to be looked at by the infill forester because of the committee of adjustment application, but also during the site plan process, it's looked at the planning forester who looks at private trees, and also by the forester in the event that there are public trees would also look at it. So you have a lot of people taking a look at the tree situation in conjunction with all of the other plans that have been submitted along with the applications of servicing and everything like that. And not just servicing, also pathways like the garbage pad at the front, which is a great idea. We still want to make sure that there's no interference or possible interference with trees. And further to that, there's going to be the assurance that there's appropriate tree protection during the construction period, as alluded to by Rosalind.
Awesome. Thank you, JC and Jeff. And David, I think Jeff may have just answered your question in the chat on whether the city is proposing to install a sidewalk on Athlone Avenue south of Richmond Road. If you look to the chat right now, some of the additional sort of information on the Byron Highcroft Athlone integrated infrastructure replacement is right there. I don't know if that
Sorry,
speaks
Steph.
to that.
I just realized, no, it doesn't. The project scope for the Byron Athlone Highcroft is just slightly north of Byron Avenue down Athlone, and there are no plans currently to put a sidewalk on Athlone. That sidewalk would go in between Byron and Richmond, presumably when that water main work needs to be done. Generally speaking, we don't get sidewalks without that integrated work taking place, and that's I think I was chatting with a resident the other day at an event that is extremely frustrating because of course the residents on Athlone, I'm just pulling up my map to refresh myself, you know, we want them to walk to LRT, and that Athlone block between Richmond and Byron without a sidewalk is that's a barrier to that, obviously. I'm just pulling up the map. Where is it? Maps.
I'll take the moment maybe to say that we're down to our last question with this one. And I know Rosalind has also been answering some of the questions directly on the detail she's obviously best able to speak to, but with the space and time, and we've still got 10 minutes, if there's any clarity or follow-ups, anything like that, you know, this is the sort of time to get them in. Doesn't mean it's the last moment for you to do that. As JC said, comments will keep coming in. If anything comes up you think of just after this meeting, you can obviously send that to our office and JC as well. And I'm always around, happy to help as much as I can. And Jeff can obviously speak to the broader and detailed matters that I'm not hunting down.
No worries. I've just confirmed. Yeah. So between Byron and Richmond on Athlone, there's currently no sidewalk, and it's not part of the integrated work that's going to be done. Realistically speaking, they probably wouldn't put a sidewalk in there until the point at which they do the water main and the pipe renewal. So for those residents who are keen on using a sidewalk in order to be able to get down to Richmond Road and further north to the LRT station, some of those folks are probably going to choose to use Tweedsmuir instead. And Kelly, you were told that the section of Athlone between Wesley and Clare Gardens Park was going to include a sidewalk, and they rip it up. Yeah, as far as I know, that is absolutely the plan. And we're just talking about that section that's out of the project scope between Richmond and Byron, where in an ideal world we'd have sidewalks going in concurrent with intensification, but that's not the way the city works sometimes.
Awesome. And I see another comment coming in just on the sidewalk between Byron and Richmond, and those who are more content to have no sidewalk or not. I know we're going off topic in this case though. I can't see any further questions on the site plan details for this. So if everyone's good with it, Jeff, I think you might have been muted there. For a second.
Sorry. Yeah, and David, I mean, sidewalks are frequently controversial. Many people prefer not to have them. It gives them a longer lawn, so to speak, even though obviously the city still owns a significant portion of it. The current policy for the city means that when they go in to do the water main renewal on this portion of Athlone between Byron and Richmond, it's pretty much a 100% certainty that they would be putting sidewalks and traffic calming through that portion. But I know not everyone is keen to get those sidewalks in.
Fantastic. I don't see any other raised hands. Rosalind and Peter, did you have any sort of penultimate comments to offer, or do you mind if we begin to wrap it up?
Oh, that would be great. And I'm sorry I got a little distracted there at the end. Got
Hmm.
a kid walked in with an ice pack.
The at-home life for everyone, I'm sure. So in that case, if everyone's good with it, I'll start to just sort of wrap it up for us. So I'm going to put a link in the chat for everybody. This is our YouTube channel, direct link. Again, though, you can just search up directly Kichissippi Ward on YouTube. See your channel come up first thing. It'll be up very soon because I'm fairly certain not all the neighbors or those we saw comments from were at this meeting. And I'm sure some might be asking questions. Where can I get the meeting recording? Where can I watch it? That'll be the place to do it. Otherwise, I know JC and our office will be glad to take any comments going forth. I put JC's email in the chat if anyone doesn't have it. So jean-shaw.renault@ottawa.ca for anyone who might be watching and can't see the chat. And you can always write our office at jeff.leeper@ottawa.ca for any questions on information, comments, concerns relating to this. Hopefully that covers everything for everyone. But this is a sort of the first steps in this process. I'm sure we're going to still hear many comments, many questions, many concerns, and we'll be open to those and here to help as best we can. And I think, yes, Jeff put an excellent sort of just addendum in the chat. Because of the election rules, our newsletters will be paused as of August 25th. We'll be trying to get one more out, and we'll put a note in there with a specific link to the section, but you can just check on the YouTube otherwise. So with that said, we'll finish up. Thank you everyone for taking the time to come out tonight, and we appreciate your patience and your help and your comments, questions, concerns. I hope you all have a wonderful night.
Steph, thank you very much. Rosalind, JC, Peter, thank you very much. Have a good night, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you. That was very well hosted. Thank you.